The Miami Dolphins in 2014 seemed to be poised for a potential playoff spot. At one point in time, I thought that they were going to get the job done. And when you look at the Dolphins, they finished 8-8 for the second year in a row. They kind of were their own worst enemies in a way. What happens if they don't blow that game against Green Bay late and allow Aaron Rodgers to have his own Dan Marino moment? What happens if they don't fold like a tent late against the Detroit Lions? What happens if their special teams don't implode early in the season against the Buffalo Bills and da-da-da-da-da? You're talking about a Miami Dolphins team that could have very easily won 10 or 11 games and, in fact, made the playoffs. And again, once you make the playoffs, anything is possible. But for the second year in a row, the Miami Dolphins kind of toiled in the middle. They had those games where they looked like they could be world beaters. They had those games where they looked like they weren't quite ready for prime time. And that's frankly what mediocre organizations do. And the Dolphins have been for years a mediocre organization that frankly doesn't make a lot of impact, that doesn't really get a whole lot of attention or notice, and understandably and deservedly so. Now, looking at the Dolphins and why they find themselves in the current position that they're in, imagine that. We're going to talk about their recent NFL draft history. Now, they've had some hits in my mind. They got a lot of crap, for myself included, for their first-round pick in 2014, Juwan James, but at the end of the day, if the guy pans out and he can play, then does it really matter? Well, he showed in his rookie year that he was a player. He was somebody that at least, if nothing else, can be a long-term option at right tackle in the National Football League, and you could do far worse than that. You look back at their second-round pick in 2014, Jarvis Landry as well. I thought he was a real steal for them and played very well for them as a rookie in 2014. You look at back in 2012, their first-round pick, Ryan Tannehill. It's taken time, but I thought you saw some real strides in Tannehill's game in year number 3. Imagine that. You give him an offensive line, you protect him a little bit, and it's imagine how much a young quarterback can grow. And I think he's still growing, and he's still got a ways to go. And then you look back at Mike Pouncey, the first-round pick in 2011. They've had some good hits in terms of picks, especially marquee early picks, most notably on the offensive side of the ball. The problem is, though, is that this team has had plenty of misses, especially in the early portions of drafts, and most notably on the defensive side of the ball. You look at the fact that they gave up the 12th overall pick and a second-round pick in 2013 to move up to number 3 to take Deion Jordan. That was an oopsies on so many different levels, and yes, I'm already going to call that a miss because Deion Jordan's been bad when he hasn't been getting himself suspended. And they also gave up a second-round pick to move up 9 spots for some inexplicable reason to get his ass. You look back at former second-round pick, Koa Misi. He's been a nothing in the NFL. Former second-round pick in 2012, Jonathan Martin's been a bust for them, and now he's with the San Francisco 49ers. You look at another former second-round pick, Jamar Taylor. He's never really done anything. So that's multiple second-round picks that really have washed out and been nothing for the Miami Dolphins, and one former first-round pick that they gave up a second-round pick as well to get, and they've gotten nothing out of him. Just think about that for a second. Think about that. Second-round picks in 2011, 12, 13, and you've gotten basically nothing out of them whatsoever. Actually, going even farther back, I believe that's 2010, 11, 12, 13. It's 4 years, 4 different picks. You've gotten nothing out of them, as well as your first-round pick in 2013. You've gotten absolutely nothing out of. And that's where you kind of find the Dolphins, is they're kind of a middle-of-the-road mediocre team. They've got some good players in some good areas, but some major deficiencies in others. So I guess I shouldn't be that surprised that the Dolphins were trying to make some splashes in the offseason, because maybe they see the end of the road for Belichick and Brady and the Patriots and their dominance in the AFC East. They see some of the moves that the Jets and in particular the Bills are making, and they view themselves to be the second best team in the division and the team with the best quarterback, not named Tom Brady, in that division, and believe that they're the closest to potentially contending. And I think they're probably right. So it would behoove them to be aggressive and make a big-time splashy move to try and get over that hump and take that next step. And that's what they did when they signed Ndamukong Suh. They gave him a lot of money to come in, pair with Cameron Wake and Olivier Vernon, and give them one of the best defensive lines in the National Football League. But more than just that with Ndamukong Suh, you're not looking at just his individual performance and his individual impact at his position, but you're looking at how he can help all different levels of the defense, which is frankly something that the Miami Dolphins didn't have. They needed that type of guy. And now they've got it in the interior of their line with Ndamukong Suh. They let Charles Clay go, who's more of an H-back as a tight end, and bring in an injury-riddled yet very talented Jordan Cameron. He could, if he stays healthy, potentially be an upgrade over Charles Clay, but he could also be a flaming washout because he might be one concussion away from calling it a career. They got rid of Mike Wallace via trade, giving themselves some cap relief and getting rid of some headaches to potentially bring in another headache in Kenny Stills, but a younger and cheaper and perhaps long-term better option over Mike Wallace in Stills. Now, in terms of the Miami Dolphins, this is a team with bringing in Ndamukong Suh most notably, that expectations are going to be high. It's going to be playoffs or bust for their general manager, for head coach Joe Philbin, and this organization in 2015. Now you have to start thinking about making a long-term decision on Ryan Tannehill and what you're going to do with him down the road and what you're going to do with the face of this franchise and the shape of this franchise going forward. So what do? You got to draft well. This is going to be a good, important draft for the Miami Dolphins. They won't have to hit a lot. They just have to make sure they hit somewhere at least once or twice. Now, in terms of their biggest needs, I think their biggest need is at wide receiver. Yes, they brought in Kenny Stills, but they let go of Brian Hartline. They let go of Mike Wallace. And when you look at both Landry and Stills, they're two guys that I think, frankly, are better suited to play in the slot at the NFL level. I don't really know that they have an outside wide receiver, and I most especially know that they don't have a big-time number one wide receiver. And at the end of the day, Ryan Tannehill is the face of your franchise right now. He's a quarterback. That means you need to help out that quarterback. And you can't sit there and have made some of the strides you made on offense in 2014 with Lamar Miller in that running game and that improved offensive line play just to take a huge step back because now he doesn't have anybody to freaking throw to, especially with the risk of bringing in an injury-plagued Jordan Cameron. What happens if he gets injured? Then who the hell does he have to throw to? Wide receiver has to be the number one need. They also need help in that linebacking core. Now, obviously, having a guy like Ndamukong Suh up the middle is going to help tremendously, but they need that middle linebacker, that guy that could be a three-down backer, a guy that can be a quarterback of the defense, so to speak, a guy that can do a little bit of everything, something they haven't had, obviously, since Zach Thomas. They need that type of guy. They could also use some help in the secondary, namely in the cornerback position. I don't think that's an area they've been particularly good outside of Grimes. They need more help. They need more depth there. I think they could also use some help on the interior of that offensive line as well, most notably at guard. And I also think with Wake and Vernon, especially with Wake not being the youngest guy in the world, they could use some edge rush depth, something that they haven't gotten out of Deion Jordan. They need to get that. They need to find another guy so that way they have some depth and to help themselves out long term. But the two biggest needs to me are a big-time playmaking wide receiver and a big-time middle linebacker. Now, in terms of their draft philosophy, I do envision that the Miami Dolphins can follow up their aggressiveness in pursuing Ndamukong Suh in free agency with being aggressive here in the draft and wanting to move up from number 14. I don't know if that's the best strategy just because is it really wise with the limited amount of picks you have if you're the Miami Dolphins with not having a third rounder? Do you really want to tie your entire draft into one pick by moving up into the top 5 to maybe get a guy like Kevin White? Or do you want to sit there and potentially have to sabotage some of your 2016 draft just to move up in the 2015 draft? I don't know if that's the best strategy. There could be some desperation there, though, in Miami. There could be some big-time pressure in there to keep up with a Buffalo, keep up with the Jets and some of the moves they've made in the offseason to try and close that gap between the Dolphins and the Patriots. And as a result, they might feel that they need an impact player more than anything else. The biggest thing they need to do is now they've got their quarterback on offense, so to speak, in Tannehill, and they got their franchise piece on defense in Ndamukong Suh. It's time to build around them. It's time to put them in the best possible situations to succeed, where it's not all on their shoulders. So in this draft, that's the biggest thing that the Miami Dolphins need to accomplish. In terms of what they do in the first round, they could do several different things. They could potentially trade up to get a big-time wide receiver. They could stay put and take a wide receiver. They could stay put and take a corner. Hell, for all we know, they could stay put and take an edge rusher. They could also trade down and potentially take an inside linebacker. These are all areas of need. The Dolphins don't necessarily have to be tied into any one position, although I think they should most strongly consider taking a wide receiver in round number 1 because, again, at the end of the day, even though you paid all that money to Ndamukong Suh, You're still in the division with Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. You're going to have to score some points. Ryan Tannehill is ultimately the face of that franchise. And with the losses of Mike Wallace and Brian Hartline and Brandon Gibson, you need some help for him in that and Charles Clay. You need some help for him in that passing game. And I just don't know that the Dolphins have enough weapons to be taken seriously at this point and most certainly contend with the New England Patriots in the AFC East. If that's the Dolphins' goal, then that's the biggest thing they have to do. They have to come out of this draft with the big-time #1 wide receiver.